Isaac Asimov's Pioneers of Science and Exploration. Henry Hudson, Arctic explorer and North American adventurer. The mysterious Henry Hudson. Rising above the majestic Hudson River in the state of New York is a range of mountains called the Catskills. According to legend, a band of strange, ragged men used to roam these mountains playing ninepins, an early bowling game. It was said that what people thought was thunder rumbling through the hills was really the noise of the men's wild bowling matches. Storytellers also claim that the leader of these men was the ghost of the English explorer Henry Hudson. In the early 1600s, Henry Hudson sailed the Arctic waters above Europe and North America. He battled icebergs off the northern coast of Russia. He explored the Hudson River and wrote glowing descriptions of the lands along its banks. He crossed huge Hudson Bay in present-day Canada and spent the winter locked to its icy shore. Even today, we have detailed records of these exciting expeditions. Such records of Henry Hudson's early life, however, do not exist. We don't know when Hudson was born. We don't know what kind of family he grew up in. We don't know what he looked like or where he went to school. Until we see him on the deck of a ship in 1607, headed for the unknown seas north of Europe, his life has been almost a complete mystery. But today's historians are able to piece together clues about people like Henry Hudson. Because of their work, the story of Hudson's life is no longer a mystery. An appetite for exploring. Henry Hudson was probably born in London, England, sometime in the early 1570s. He may have been the son of a sea captain or a merchant. He probably was the grandson of one of the aldermen of London, also named Henry Hudson. The elder Henry Hudson helped start the Muscovy Company. This English business venture had two goals. One goal was to trade English wool for Russian furs, gold, and other valuable items. The other goal was to find a short route to the trading ports of China. Perhaps it was his grandfather who awakened young Henry Hudson's appetite for exploring. From his grandfather, he might have heard about the adventures of brave sea captains who had sailed the northern seas. He might have heard tales from the sailors themselves as they docked on the wharves of the Thames River. Some historians even think that as a teenager, Henry Hudson might have sailed to the shores of North America with English explorer John Davis. In 1587, Davis led an expedition to find a waterway across North America that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Although no one knew for sure, many people thought that such a Northwest Passage existed. Late in the summer, Davis and his crew sailed into a channel filled with whirlpools and swirling ice. Davis didn't have time to sail all the way through the channel before winter closed in. But he described the channel, which he called Furious Overfall, as a possible Northwest Passage. If young Henry Hudson sailed on this voyage, he might have dreamed of someday crossing this dangerous channel. If Hudson didn't go with Davis, he might have read Davis's account of his harrowing voyage. Whatever the influence, Hudson was an expert navigator by the time he was in his early 30s. In 1607, the leaders of the Muscovy Company hired him to find a new trade route to the Orient, the faraway lands of India and China. Over the Pole. Walking through London in the early 1600s wasn't always a pleasant experience. The streets were filled with garbage that people simply threw out of their windows. The garbage rotted where it fell, creating a horrible odor. The smells floating out of London's kitchens wouldn't have been much sweeter. In the 17th century, people had no way to properly preserve food. Things spoiled quickly. Sometimes the only way to make meals taste better was to cover up the flavor of spoiled food with a sprinkling of spices such as cinnamon, pepper, cloves, and nutmeg. But these prized spices were expensive. They had to be imported all the way from India and China. In the early 1600s, the Arabs and Italians controlled the land route to the Orient. The Portuguese controlled the sea route around Africa. The English paid dearly for spices that the Italians and the Portuguese sold them. Before long, the English decided that they wanted a share of the spice trade. They needed to find a new sea route to the Orient. Enter Henry Hudson. Hudson had a theory. He figured that the shortest route to the Orient from England would be one that traveled directly over the North Pole. Of course, Hudson knew nothing about the frozen mantle of snow and ice that covers the polar region. He supposed that the summer sun, which doesn't set at the North Pole, would make the climate as agreeable as that of Europe. Hudson's argument convinced the leaders of the Muscovy Company. They agreed to back his voyage and gave him a ship called the Hopewell. On May 1st, 1607, Henry Hudson set sail for the North Pole. On board the Hopewell, Hudson and his crew led a life of hardship. Their main food was a dense biscuit called hardtack. Stews of pickled meat, carrots, onions, and barley were the daily fare. Water, stored in casks, soon became green with algae. Sailing the Hopewell in the cold northern oceans was grueling work. The sails were hard to handle and stiffened with frost. The men's hands became chapped and frozen from hauling in the icy ropes. The Hopewell, made for sailing in calmer waters, rocked crazily with the Arctic swells. After a hard day on the rigging, the sailors bedded down in flimsy hammocks. As the ship rolled, the hanging beds swayed back and forth like a clock's pendulum. Even the captain's quarters were spare. Hudson slept in a small, shelf-like bed suspended from the wall. In such rough, cramped conditions, Hudson and his crew spent months buffeted by the icy gray waves. On leaving England, the Hopewell headed northwest, slipping by the Faroe Islands and Iceland. After sailing for 6 weeks, Hudson and his crew sighted the coast of Killilil-Nannet, formerly Greenland. The weather was terrible. Rain froze on the decks and fog closed in around the ship. Nevertheless, the Hopewell continued northward. A week later, the fog lifted. Hudson spotted the mountains of Killilil-Nannet looming in the west, but his maps showed only water. The sailors spent the next 2 weeks mapping the coast of this monstrous frozen island. Packs of ice eventually forced Hudson to change course. He turned northeast and soon reached a group of islands that Dutch explorers had named Spitsbergen. For several weeks, the Hopewell cruised through the islands, where the sailors saw seals and walrus sunning themselves on rocks. The men were amazed by the tiny trees that dotted the wind-swept land. But the biggest surprise came when they sailed into a sheltered bay where the whales were so thick that they rubbed against the ship. Hudson named the cove Whales Bay. Exploring the land, the sailors found deer antlers, plots of plump geese, and a spring of clear water. This abundant game and the warm weather in Whales Bay made Hudson think that his theory about the North Pole would prove true. But within a few days, the Hopewell was packed in by ice. Hudson steered his ship south, but 10 days later, its path was blocked by another groaning wall of ice. Hudson realized that there was no way through to the North Pole. Early in August, he turned back for England. The Hopewell sailed into London in mid-September. Although his first attempt to find a passage to the Orient had failed, Hudson was not defeated. The Northeast Passage. Hudson's reports of the uncountable numbers of whales off the Spitzbergen Islands pleased his backers at the Muscovy Company. Whale blubber and a whale bone were valued throughout Europe. The blubber was used for making soap, fuel for oil lamps, and grease for carriage wheels. Whalebone was cut to make corsets, women's undergarments that molded the body to an hourglass shape. Within a few months of Hudson's return, the Muscovy Company was enlisting sailors to go to Spitzbergen to launch England's whaling industry. The company asked Hudson to lead the venture, but Hudson wanted to continue searching for a route to the Orient. The Muscovy Company backed him again. This time, Hudson planned to look for a passage running northeast to China and India. Such a passage along the northern coast of Russia would allow England to trade with Russia and the Orient. Close up on a sailing ship. The ship pictured here is a galleon, similar to the kind of ship that Henry Hudson sailed. This ship, which was developed in the 16th century, averaged about 135 feet long. This would be about twice as long as a modern semi-trailer, which stretches to a length of about 65 feet. Hudson prepared to sail in April of 1608. To strengthen the Hopewell for the rigorous voyage, he had the ship's hull reinforced with extra planks of wood. He also replaced the old mast with a stronger, thicker one. Finally, he purchased a sturdy rowboat for exploring ice-encrusted shores. Even more important than these preparations was choosing the crew. Few of the sailors who had gone on Hudson's first voyage were available for the second. In Hudson's crew of 14, only 3 sailors had sailed with him to the Arctic before. For his new first mate, Hudson chose a tough, experienced sailor named Robert Juet. On a ship, the first mate took command whenever the captain was resting or asleep. For this reason, it was important that the captain pick a first mate that he could trust. Unfortunately, Juet turned out to be a sneaky man who seemed to dislike Hudson. Nevertheless, the second voyage began without trouble. The Hopewell left London on April 22, 1608. After sailing northeast for a month, Hudson and his crew rounded the north coast of Norway at the end of May. The Hopewell continued through the Barents Sea, avoiding icebergs that rose on the horizon. By the end of June, the Hopewell reached the islands called Novaya Zemlya. Hudson sailed up the west coast of one of the islands, hoping to find a channel through it. However, an ice barrier forced him to turn around and sail southward. He continued searching for a passageway through the land mass until the beginning of July. Along the way, the crew explored the coast of Novaya Zemlya, enjoying the warm sunshine, the sweet-smelling alpine flowers, and the plentiful geese and ducks they shot for food. In early July, the weather turned cold and stormy. Hudson still had not found a channel across Novaya Zemlya. Sadly, he turned the Hopewell around and headed the ship westward. But if the crew thought they were returning home, Hudson had other ideas. He wanted to sail to North America and search for the furious overfall, but he kept his plan a secret. By the end of July, the crew realized that they were headed west across the Atlantic. The first mate, Jewett, confronted the captain on his plans. Hudson confessed that he wanted to sail to North America and explore. The crew threatened to mutiny unless Hudson turned the ship around and headed home. They then forced Hudson to sign a paper saying that he was returning home of his own free will. As captain, Hudson had the right to punish anyone who refused to obey him. He could even put disobedient sailors to death. In giving in to his crew, Hudson probably lost their respect. When the Hopewell reached London in late August, however, neither Hudson nor the crew mentioned the troubles at sea. That fall, Hudson delivered his report to the Muscovy Company. Like Hudson, the leaders of the Muscovy Company were disappointed in the outcome of the voyage. They dismissed Henry Hudson from their service. Surprise visit to North America. Losing his job depressed Hudson. Exploring was his passion. Finding a passage to the Orient had become his life's goal. Luckily, Hudson soon had a new offer. Emmanuel van Meteren, a Dutch citizen living in London, came to him with an idea. The Dutch East Indies Company, a trading company in Holland, wanted to find a short route to India and China. Perhaps Hudson could get the Dutch to hire him for another voyage. Hudson liked the idea. Within a few months, he was on his way to Amsterdam to talk with the trading company. When Hudson reached Amsterdam, the Dutch delayed meeting with him. They made no promises about giving him a job. Hudson decided to talk to the French, who were also eager to expand their trade routes. When the Dutch heard of Hudson's plans, they suddenly got serious about hiring him. In January 1609, Hudson signed a contract with the Dutch. According to the agreement, Hudson was to explore the area around Novaya Zemlya, the island he had explored on his second voyage, for a passage to the Orient. For his crew, Hudson hired some men who had sailed with him before. For example, Robert Jewett signed on again. However, Hudson's contract said that half the crew had to be from Holland. This was a problem. Hudson didn't speak Dutch, so he relied on a friend who had never been to sea to do the hiring for him. Another problem Hudson faced was the ship that the Dutch provided. This ship, the Half Moon, was smaller and lighter than the Hopewell. It was made for sailing on the sheltered waters around Amsterdam, not on the open seas. Hudson complained about the ship to the Dutch sponsors, but they would not listen. Finally, Hudson settled for the less than perfect vessel. Despite his uncertainties about his ship and crew, Hudson was eager to be exploring again. On April 6, 1609, the Half Moon set sail from Amsterdam. The first part of Hudson's third voyage was full of difficulties. The weather was cold and stormy. Worst yet, the English and Dutch crew members didn't get along well. They fought over whether meals should include pickled beef, favored by the English, or pickled fish, favored by the Dutch. They quarreled over who should tend the sails when the seas got rough. The Dutch sailors, who were used to sailing in the warm seas of the tropics, went below deck whenever the icy winds began to blow. Between the squabbles and the squalls, the Half Moon progressed slowly. Not until May did the ship round Norway's northern coast. Still, the bad weather and the fighting continued. In mid-May, Hudson proposed they abandon the voyage in the icy waters above Europe. He wanted to head west to explore the coast of North America. Thankful to leave the cruel cold, the crew united behind the captain, and the Half Moon changed course. In less than a month, Hudson crossed the Atlantic, reaching the North American coast of what is now Canada. From there, the Half Moon headed south. On the way, the crew fished along the coast's rich banks and traded for furs with the Indians they met. The voyage seemed to be going well. As they continued southward, however, Hudson's crew began to grow greedy. This time, however, they did not fight with each other. Instead, they went after the Indians. One night, a group of sailors stole an Indian canoe and paddled it to the nearby Indian camp. Flashing their swords and firing their pistols, they charged the camp. The Indians fled into the forest. The sailors stole furs and other valuable items that the Indians had collected to trade. Hudson did nothing to punish the sailors for what they had done to the Indians. Instead, the next morning, the Half Moon silently slipped away. Hudson continued sailing along the North American coast for more than a month. On August 19th, he turned the Half Moon around near a jut of land now known as Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and headed northward. This time, Hudson began searching for a waterway that might connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. He sailed up Chesapeake Bay, but soon realized that this waterway was a dead end. He decided the same was true of Delaware Bay. On September 2nd, the ship sailed into a magnificent harbor. This, the men were sure, would lead to the Orient. A few days later, they sailed into the entryway of the river known as the Hudson. Hudson's first days on the river that bears his name were tragic. On September 6th, he sent a crew ahead in a small boat to explore the river's channel. As the men were sailing back to the ship, a canoe full of Indians attacked without warning. A shower of arrows fell all around the Europeans. One man fell dead, pierced in the throat. The next day, the crew buried the sailor and continued up the river, more weary than before. 2 days later, Indian canoes again approached the Half Moon. When the sailors saw bows and arrows in the canoes, they took no chances. They captured 2 Indians and sailed on. With Indian hostages aboard, the sailors were confident that no other Indians would attack. No longer afraid, they treated the hostages badly. Eventually, however, the Indians escaped and swam to shore. By that time, the Half Moon had traveled a long way up the Hudson River. The ship and its crew had passed through what is now New York Harbor. The tall buildings and the giant ocean vessels that line the harbor today would dwarf a ship the size of the little Half Moon. The ship sailed even further upriver past high cliffs that rose along the river's western shores. Here the men noted the strange plant and animal life of this rich land that Hudson called the finest for cultivation that I ever in my life set foot upon. Here, too, relations between the Europeans and the Indians were friendlier. Some of the Indians even invited Hudson and his crew to feast in their villages. There, Hudson could not help but admire the natives' skills as hunters, builders, fishers, and farmers. The stunning scenery continued as Hudson sailed into the rugged region where the Catskill Mountains border the river. But the river had narrowed. Hudson began to suspect that this was not a passage to the Orient and sent a small boat ahead to explore. The sailors confirmed his suspicions. Hudson sadly turned the Half Moon around and sailed back downstream. By the beginning of October, the ship reached the mouth of the river. There, the sailors skirmished with a large group of Indians. Among them were probably the two men the sailors had held as hostages. Several Indians were killed in the fighting. Hudson, taking no chances of further battles, sailed on through the night. When the ship reached the Atlantic, Hudson and his crew held a meeting. Hudson wanted to spend the winter in North America and sail north in the spring to search for the furious Overfall. Most of the crew wanted to return to Europe for provisions. In the end, they agreed to winter in the British Isles, stock up for another voyage, and return to North America with Hudson the following year. The Half Moon reached the English port of Dartmouth on November 7th. Hudson sent word of his explorations to the Dutch at once and began preparing for another voyage. The sailors, however, were at loose ends. Although sworn to secrecy, they began telling stories of their adventures along the mighty river. Word got back to London. Soon, even King James I had heard of Hudson's discoveries. The king was furious that the work of one of his subjects would benefit another country. He had Henry Hudson arrested and brought back to London. There, Hudson sat in his house, surrounded by soldiers. He waited grimly for the king to bring him to trial on charges of treason. The Icy Bay. When the English people heard about Hudson's arrest, many were outraged. Sailing for another country was not against English law. Most people thought the king was treating Hudson unfairly. A group of men went to the king and asked him to release the explorer. They convinced King James to allow Hudson to sail under the English flag. The men even raised the money for a ship and crew. By early spring, Hudson was eagerly preparing for his fourth expedition. For his crew, Hudson hired many men, including Juet, who had sailed with him before. He also hired some men who had never been to sea. Among them was a rowdy man named Henry Green. Green came from a respectable family, but he had fallen in with a rough crowd. He went on drunken sprees, got into fights, and, in general, caused trouble. However, the young man had visited Hudson when he was under arrest and expressed his admiration and sympathy for the captain. Possibly to show his gratitude, Hudson hired Green. With all preparations made, Hudson and crew left London on April 17th, 1610, aboard the ship Discovery. Sailing went smoothly for the first few weeks, and the Discovery made rapid progress crossing the Atlantic. But trouble soon brewed with the crew. Green got into a fight with another sailor. Juet began spreading rumors about Hudson, saying he had brought Green aboard to spy on the men. Hudson punished neither Green nor Juet for their disruptive behavior. Instead, he pushed on for North America. By June 15th, they sighted the large islands off the northern coast of what is today the Canadian province of Quebec. On June 25th, they entered the furious Overfall. This channel, now called Hudson Strait, connects the Atlantic Ocean with the large body of water that has come to be known as Hudson Bay. Its surging tides, treacherous ice flows, and thick fogs make it challenging even for today's most experienced and well-equipped navigators. Little wonder that the sailors aboard the Discovery were terrified by the violent waters. As they sailed the 400 miles down this dangerous channel, they pleaded with Hudson to turn back. Hudson refused to give in to the men's fears. On August 2nd, the Discovery entered a spacious sea of open water. Hudson was sure that he had found a northern route to the Pacific and was on his way to the Orient. For a month, the crew sailed south, hopeful that they would soon be in tropical waters. But then suddenly, land cut off their passage. Hudson sailed all along the coast, searching every inlet for a way through. As fall came on, the crew began to worry. When the sailors came to Juet, he mumbled that the ship was lost and that Hudson would lead them to their deaths. Hudson heard about the trouble and put Juet on trial. A number of men spoke up, saying that the first mate had been whispering against the captain from the beginning of the voyage. Hudson demoted Juet and punished other members of the crew he felt had been disloyal. He promoted other sailors to take their places. With ice forming on the waters, Hudson, by his actions, had split the crew into two groups. One group supported him, the other held grudges against him. The situation on board the ship was menacing, but the approaching winter was even more threatening. By November, the Discovery was iced in at the southern tip of Hudson Bay. It was a rocky, barren place. The men had no luck fishing. When they went hunting, they spotted no wild game. They couldn't even find berries to eat. With their stores of food dwindling, the crew faced the future in fear. The harsh northern winter took its toll on the crew. Many of the men became so sick from the cold and lack of food that they could hardly move. Tempers flared and more men sided against Hudson. Even Greene, who had avoided conflict with Hudson until then, quarreled with the captain. The bitterness lasted even after spring began to thaw the frozen bay and warm the land. It wasn't until early June that the Discovery came free from the ice. Inspired by the balmy breezes, Hudson headed the ship westward to explore the uncharted waters that he hoped would lead to the Orient. By this time, however, many of the sailors had lost respect for the captain. They wanted only to go home. Greene, Juet, and a few of Hudson's other enemies quietly plotted mutiny. On the morning of June 24th, 3 men jumped Hudson as he left his quarters. They bound him hand and foot and lowered him into a small boat. Meantime, the mutineers rounded up the crew members who were still loyal to the captain and those who were ill and forced them to join Hudson. Then they set the small boat adrift, leaving them without food, fresh water, or any other necessities. The brave explorer and his unfortunate band of loyal sailors were never seen or heard from again. The legacy of Henry Hudson. The remaining crew of the Discovery headed back to England, but without Henry Hudson's skill as a navigator, the crew faced a difficult journey. They had to contend with rough seas, attacks by Indians, and the threat of starvation. When the Discovery reached England in the autumn of 1611, all the leaders of the mutiny had died. The surviving crew members were never punished for their crimes at sea. The fate of Henry Hudson himself has remained a mystery. Most historians think the explorer either starved to death on the shores of Hudson Bay or that he drowned in the bay's cold waters. Others claim he and his men made it to shore and eventually intermarried with the Cree Indians in the area. Some people even believe that Hudson's ghost still roams the regions of North America that Hudson explored. Whatever happened to the explorer, his adventures are legendary. He is remembered by people all over the world for exploring the waterways that bear his name: the Hudson River, Hudson Strait, and Hudson Bay. His voyages did much to further European exploration and settlement of North America. The end. This has been Isaac Asimov's Pioneers of Science and Exploration, Henry Hudson, Arctic explorer and North American adventurer.